Dr. Bryan is an international expert in nitric biochemistry and molecular medicine. His more than 20 years in academic research led to many seminal discoveries and resulted in dozens of issued US and international patents. Products from his innovations are the most successful nitric oxide products in the market and responsible for hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue around the globe and have improved patient care for more than a decade. So please give it a big hand for Dr. Bryan.
Testing. Hi, Nathan. It's Jim.
Unmute?
Can you hear me, Nathan?
Yeah, we're just gonna get you to unmute.
Okay.
Just be once.
There. I think he's talking, but we don't hear him yet, obviously.
Just 1 minute.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, now we hear you, Nathan. Okay. Hello, this is Jim.
Hey, Tim. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you for coming on today and doing this presentation. We're excited to hear you.
Well, yeah, sorry I couldn't be there in person. Just busy week, as you know, but I certainly appreciate the opportunity to be joining you remotely.
For sure. Yeah, another time we can come in person anytime, in fact. So, okay,
Sure.
well, I guess we're ready to go. Looking forward to your presentation, like I said, and have fun doing it.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Okay.
So welcome, everyone. Again, thanks, Gene and Jim and everybody there, People Unlimited. It's really great pleasure to be with you, and I applaud you for being there. And certainly, you know, your mission is inspiring. So what I hope today is to kind of unlock some potential in this whole concept of longevity and really combating not just aging, but the diseases of aging. And so what I thought I'd focus on was just kind of the objective measures of aging and longevity, which are telomeres, stem cells, and mitochondria. And then hopefully leave you with some practical, common sense information that you can apply in your everyday life to live longer. So as Mariana said in that introduction, I've been in academia for more than 20 years, really trying to answer 4 fundamental questions through my research program. And that's how the human body produces nitric oxide, what goes wrong in people that can't make it, what are the clinical consequences, and then how do you fix or restore endogenous NO production or signaling. That's led to a number of over 100 peer-reviewed papers in the literature, dozens of patents. I've given over 300 lectures around the world. So I've started a lot of companies. I'm really conflicted in terms of, you know, what we do, kind of productizing technology. There are a number of companies, and really my objective has been to deliver safe and effective nitric oxide product technologies in every major market segment around the world. We've done this in nutrition, we've done it in dietary supplements, we've done it in skincare, and now we're moving this technology through FDA clinical trials through our drug company, Bryan Therapeutics. And I think I'll have time to show you a little bit of that data. But, you know, one of the common questions I get is, you know, why have you siloed yourself into a single study of focus? And really, why nitric oxide? And so today we know that many diseases, most, if not all, are associated with an impaired production of nitric oxide availability. And even 20 years ago, we thought if we could develop a kind of a fingerprint of nitric oxide in different disease states, then we could, you know, start to develop rational therapies that could restore nitric oxide and then really fix every condition that a lack of nitric oxide deficiency causes. But that required us to understand why, how, and when nitric oxide is metabolized to other species, and which, if any of these, elicit what biological response. And I like this quote here from, decades ago, that research is to see what everyone else has seen and to think what no one else has thought. So I'm going to share with you how we've thought a little bit differently in the field and how that's led to some really transformational discoveries and some true product innovation that I'll share with you at the end. But I think this is the take-home slide, and I think everyone in this room certainly appreciates that if you want to live longer and better, you need nitric oxide. And so now what I'll do over the next 25 minutes is show you the science that corroborates this statement. And I like to start with scans because it's really the clinical observations that lead to innovative discoveries. And I think once we understand kind of the mechanism of disease, it's then and only then we can develop rational therapies. So now we have some non-invasive imaging where you can start to look inside the human body. One of my favorites is with Dr. Amen and SPECT scans. And SPECT scans mechanistically are telling us how well perfused each individual organ, in this particular case, the brain. So on the right, on the left, the healthy brain, you see it's nicely contoured. That's illustrating that all parts of the brain are getting sufficient blood supply, oxygen, and circulation. On the right, we have an unhealthy brain, and this is a patient with the chronic traumatic encephalopathy, alcohol, substance abuse. And these holes in the brain are reflective of areas where there's insufficient blood supply or circulation. We call this focal ischemia. So obviously, if these parts of the brain aren't getting the oxygen and nutrients they need, then they can't do their job, and that's the basis for neurological disease. The same thing happens in the heart. This is an invasive angiogram showing a patient that had a thrombus in the left circumflex here on the left. And then if you can go in and you aspirate this thrombus, you can see here you can restore coronary blood flow. And if you do this in a timely manner, you can prevent injury from heart attack. And even if you go a little bit deeper into neurons, and the basis for neuropathy is microvascular dysfunction. So when the neurons start to lose the integrity of the blood vessels, and you get diseased blood vessels, then these nerves don't get the sodium, potassium, the blood supply, and oxygen they need to elicit an action potential. And that's really the mechanism and the basis for peripheral neuropathy. So every single chronic disease is characterized by decreased blood flow. If you can restore blood flow and perfusion, you can correct many of these conditions. So really the question we've been trying to answer for decades, if not centuries, is how do you restore blood flow and perfusion to every organ, tissue, and cell in the body? And that's what nitric oxide does. And that's what I focused my entire career on, this very simple molecule. It's a gas. Once it's produced, it's gone in less than a second. But while it's around, it does some really amazing things. In fact, today it's recognized that the cardiopulmonary cycle is a 3-gas system. So we all know when we breathe in oxygen, it binds to the heme iron of hemoglobin. And when we go from the arteries to the veins, it releases oxygen, picks up carbon dioxide, and we exhale carbon dioxide in the breath. But this cycle does not work unless nitric oxide is in this cycle, and nitric oxide is bound to hemoglobin. So without nitric oxide, you don't get oxygen uptake and you don't get oxygen delivery. And obviously, we've just survived this 3 to 4 years of COVID, where the primary problem was hypoxemia, and the loss of blood oxygen saturation. And the reason that happened in COVID was because the people that got sick and died from COVID were the people who couldn't make nitric oxide. So they could never fully oxygenate, even when they were put on mechanical vents and 100% oxygen. And that's what led to the really untimely and unnecessary deaths in these patients. So we have to focus on restoring the production of nitric oxide. And it's involved in every biological function. It tells our own stem cells to mobilize and differentiate. It's what's responsible for erections in both men and women. And it's how our immune system kills off invading pathogens. And the discovery of nitric oxide was recognized as so important that in 1998, a Nobel Prize was awarded to the scientists responsible for its discovery, Bob Furchgott, Lou Ignora, and Fred Murat. And I've been very fortunate to work alongside all 3 of these throughout my course of my career. And it was Fred Murat who recruited me to join the faculty of University of Texas Medical School in Houston back almost 20 years ago now, where we started a drug discovery program. So if you can't make nitric oxide, how do you present clinically? Well, you develop high blood pressure, you develop sexual dysfunction, vascular dementia, Alzheimer's, diabetes, peripheral artery disease. And this is a short list of the clinical symptoms of nitric oxide deficiency. And you'll recognize that these are really the poorly managed diseases today that are completely unmanaged by Western medicine. And these are also the risk factors for COVID, influenza, or whatever new pandemic may be on the horizon. If you're healthy and you have a robust immune system, make nitric oxide, we can be exposed to virus, bacteria all day long, and our body deals with it. Can't make nitric oxide, then you get sick from these infections. So let's go down to the basics. That a man is as old as his arteries. We've understood this now for hundreds of years. And the older we get, we start to develop plaque under the lining of the blood vessels. If this plaque becomes unstable, it ruptures, and that's the basis for the #1 killer of men and women worldwide. We started to understand years ago, about 20 years ago, that once you lose the ability to produce nitric oxide in the lining of the blood vessels, then that sets the stage for atherosclerosis. And today we even know that if you have overt cardiovascular disease and you restore nitric oxide production, this whole process is reversible. We've seen 11% plaque regression in as little as 6 months in some of our therapeutic trials. But what's most important, and I think for you guys who are proactive instead of reactive, if you can maintain healthy nitric oxide levels and you can prevent the onset progression of the #1 killer of men and women worldwide. So if you want to live longer and live better, then don't die from the #1 killer of men and women, which is cardiovascular disease. And today we know how to do that because we understand what causes arteries to age, and the onset development of cardiovascular disease is inflammation, immune dysfunction, oxidative stress. And in this half hour, I don't have time to take you through the biochemistry and the publications that we've identified over the past 20 years, but suffice it to say that when we restore nitric oxide production, you reduce inflammation, immune dysfunction, and oxidative stress. And part of the mechanism of this is nitric oxide reacting and quenching oxygen radicals such as superoxide. And then this is detoxified further into nitrite and nitrate through enzymatic pathways or simple solution chemistry. So if you look at how we measure aging today, there are three main objective measures. There's telomeres. Telomeres, we'll go into detail on each of these. There's mitochondrial dysfunction, and there's loss of stem cell function and repair. So let's just very quickly review this. And this is what I presented about 20 years ago, that nitric oxide is the unified theory of aging. It controls and regulates all three of these: telomerase activity, mitochondrial function, and biogenesis, and it tells our own stem cells to mobilize and differentiate. So the telomeres, for those of you who are not familiar with this, are the ends of the chromosomes that with each cell division can become shorter. And now we know today that shorter telomeres, shorter lifespan, longer telomeres, longer lifespan. So if we can prevent telomere shortening or extend telomere length, we can, by definition, extend lifespan. These are the seminal papers that told us that nitric oxide is what activates telomerase activity and prevents telomere shortening. So nitric oxide is now considered the master signaling molecule in the regulation of telomerase activity and provides the opportunity for innovative therapeutic approaches based on the use of innoactive compounds. So I'll take you through, I'm not going to go into detail because we're just spending 30 minutes on this, but we're certainly happy to answer questions or send you the publications on this. And then mitochondria. Mitochondria are the energy-producing organelles of the cell. Every major chronic disease is associated with lower numbers of mitochondria per cell. And then the mitochondria don't make ATP or the cellular energy very efficiently. So we lose efficiency and we lose mitochondrial numbers. And for just by brief review, these are the organelles of the cell that they reduce molecular oxygen into water and produce ATP or adenosine triphosphate. And that's the energy currency of the cell. But nitric oxide is what controls and regulates every aspect about the metabolic activity of mitochondrial ATP production. And we all know the importance of intermittent fasting, caloric restriction, physical exercise, but all of this is dependent upon the cell's ability to produce nitric oxide. So if the cell can't make nitric oxide, which happens in endothelial dysfunction, then you can do caloric restriction, you can do intermittent fasting, but you're never going to get PGC1 alpha activation and mitochondrial biogenesis until you fix the cell's ability to produce nitric oxide. So this is extremely important. And now that we understand how to restore the cell's ability to make nitric oxide, now all these other modalities that we're learning about to extend lifespan and prevent disease now can be better applied and better clinical results if the cell is able to make nitric oxide. One of the other important, interesting aspects of nitric oxide is it improves exercise capacity. And it does this by extending the oxygen gradient in the tissue. So if the body can make sufficient nitric oxide, you actually deliver more oxygen, produce more ATP with less oxygen by the mitochondria. And we also prevent the oxidative stress. And there's two mechanisms, complex 1 and complex 4, where nitric oxide can actually inhibit superoxide production, improve exercise efficiency, and reversibly inhibit oxygen consumption. So that now that allows oxygen to fuse further into tissue and prevent lactic acid buildup. And what about stem cells? You know, we're constantly wearing ourselves out, and aging is just the inability to repair and replace dysfunctional cells that then can maintain normal cellular function. So aging is not a matter of the increase of damage, but a matter of failure to replace it due to the decreased number of stem cells. And now we're learning really it's not the decreased number of stem cells with age, but the inability of the signal to tell our own stem cells to mobilize and differentiate. And that signal is nitric oxide. So nitric oxide is the signal that tells our own stem cells to mobilize and differentiate, repair and replace tissues. And then the bioavailability of nitric oxide in patients may predict stem cell therapy success or failure. So your ability to repair and regenerate is dependent upon the body's ability to make nitric oxide. So by every objective measure, if you want to live longer and better, your body must be able to produce nitric oxide. So that begs the question, well, how do we produce nitric oxide? And once we understand how the body produces nitric oxide, then and only then can we fix it, restore it, and overcome every aspect of aging. So today we understand there's two main pathways where the body makes nitric oxide. The first one to be discovered was through an enzyme called nitric oxide synthase. And this enzyme, through a 5-electron oxidation reaction, converts arginine to nitric oxide. And then there's a secondary pathway through diet, primarily nitrate found in green leafy vegetables, a 3-electron reduction reaction to produce nitric oxide. So one can compensate for the other, but when you lose the ability to make nitric oxide from both, that's when you develop symptoms of nitric oxide deficiency and puts you on a very slippery slope to chronic disease. So again, in half an hour, I don't have time to go into the details, but let's just say that arginine is controlled by the enzymatic function of the NOS enzyme, and we're never deficient in arginine or citrulline. So there's no reason to supplement with these amino acids. And in fact, I'm going to show you doing so can actually cause more harm. And then nitrate from the diet is controlled by the amount we consume, the presence or absence of nitrate-reducing bacteria in the oral cavity, and stomach acid production. So if we first look at the enzyme that makes nitric oxide in the lining of the blood vessels, this is what typical population-based studies tell us, that we lose about 10 to 12% of our nitric oxide production or endothelial function per decade. So by the time we're 40 or 50 years old, we only have about 40 to 50% of the nitric oxide we had when we were younger. And this is what sets the stage for age-related disease. But today we know that this doesn't have to be the case. In fact, we can completely prevent this age-related decline in nitric oxide production. And I think I'm probably the best example. I turned 50 last week, but I have the vascular age of a 32-year-old. So we can completely prevent this age-related decline, or at least shift this curve to the right. And this is how it's designed to work. So when we begin to exercise, that causes shear stress, and this will be the cross-section of a blood vessel. And when we begin to exercise, it tells the cell, hey, I need nitric oxide. Once nitric oxide is produced, it binds to an enzyme called guanylyl cyclase that converts GTP into cyclic GMP, and that causes smooth muscle relaxation and vasodilation. And this, as most of you are aware, are where drugs like Viagra work. So nitric oxide turns this switch on, and Viagra keeps it on. And that's the reason we're warned against 4-hour erections, unsafe drop in blood pressure. But yet 50% of the men that are prescribed these drugs don't respond with better erections. And the reason that they don't respond is there's not enough nitric oxide made here to activate this second messenger signaling that leads to vasodilation. So these data tell us that erectile dysfunction in both men and women is a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. And today we understand what leads to NOS uncoupling, and it's oxidation of BH4. So the NOS enzyme is, without getting too technical, is two homodimers or two twins that allow for this flow of electrons to produce nitric oxide. But when they become uncoupled, this enzyme actually produces superoxide instead of nitric oxide. And today we know kind of the electrical potential needed to prevent BH4 oxidation, or the extraction of an electron from this biomolecule. So if you don't understand electron flow, then there are a lot of companies out there trying to sell you nitric oxide products that have no idea about biochemistry or enzymology. So buyer beware. The other important consideration is the physical chemistry associated with electron transfer. And this is called the Nernst potential, or the redox potential. The electrical potential that's needed to steal an electron from a biomolecule. So today we understand what's required for BH4 oxidation. We overcome this, we can maintain BH4, BH2 ratios, and completely lead to NOS coupling and the loss of nitric oxide, and preventing the loss of nitric oxide production. So we know how to fix the biochemistry in the lining of the blood vessels. Now, how do we use diet, nutrition, and food to provide nitric oxide support? Well, we go back to the atmospheric nitrogen cycle, The air we breathe is 78% nitrogen. This nitrogen is fixed primarily by lightning. So the soils fix nitrogen either through nitrogen fixing bacteria or application of nitrogen-based fertilizers. And then any plants that we eat that's grown in the soil, or any animals that we eat that eats the grass or the vegetables, we're getting a source of these nitrogen oxides. And then when we consume these foods, there's nitrate that's found in these vegetables that's taken up in the gut, concentrated in our salivary glands. And now 90 minutes after you consume a green leafy vegetable or a nitrate-rich meal, the salivary glands secrete nitrate. There are bacteria that live on the crypts of the tongue that metabolize nitrate into nitrite. When we swallow our own saliva, this produces nitric oxide. So let's go through this whole process because this is very important. And we have to understand each step in order to improve nitric oxide production through the diet. So we need at least 300 to 400 milligrams as a bolus. And we've compared this to what we call the standard American diet or the SAD diet. And we're only getting about 150 milligrams in the standard American diet. So the next question was, well, if I wanted to use diet as a first-line therapy, how much celery, broccoli, spinach would I need to eat in order to get this 300 milligrams of nitrate? And we published this in 2012, but this is a figure from one of the papers we published. And there's a lot of numbers on here, but just let me simplify this. If you take celery, so we went to Chicago, Dallas, Los Angeles, New York, and Raleigh. We bought these vegetables off the shelf. We brought it back to the lab. And if you lived in Dallas or Los Angeles, you could go to the grocery store, buy 5 to 6 stalks of celery, eat that, get enough nitrate to produce nitric oxide to normalize your blood pressure. If you lived in New York, you'd have to eat 30 or 40 stalks of celery. So there's regional differences in the nitrate content of these vegetables. There's differences across vegetable categories. And these are conventionally grown vegetables, meaning fertilizers added to the soil. We compare this to organically grown vegetables, and you can see here in cabbage and broccoli, there's about 10 times less nitrate than that in conventionally grown. So you cannot eat enough organic vegetables to get enough nitrate to manage your blood pressure. So I tell people organic is good because you're not getting the glyphosate and the herbicides or pesticides, but to get an organic label in the US, you can't add nitrogen-based fertilizers to the soil. And that's a problem. Without nitrogen, you can't assimilate other nutrients. And we know that since 1940s, there's a 78% decrease in all micronutrients in the foods grown in America. So the pressures of feeding a growing population is at the expense of nutrient density. The other consideration is nitrate is completely inert in humans. We rely on the bacteria that live in and on our body to do this. And we look at the numbers, 200 million Americans use mouthwash every day, 200 million Americans use antacids, and there's 200 million prescriptions written for antibiotics every year. And we wonder why Americans are the sickest people on earth. And here are the data. So if you take normal intensive patients and you just give them mouthwash twice a day for 7 days, their blood pressure goes up. 2 out of 3 Americans use mouthwash. 2 out of 3 Americans have an unsafe elevation in blood pressure. This is not coincidental. This is causal. So we started looking in this pathway about 20 years ago, and it made sense to us because the bacteria that live in and on our body provide 3 million gene products. The human genome is only 23,000 gene products. So we asked the question, can we culture bacteria that are living in the mouth on the crypts of the tongue that contribute to the maintenance of healthy blood pressure? And this is extremely important because high blood pressure is the #1 risk factor for the #1 killer of men and women worldwide, which is cardiovascular disease. Here's our paper from 2014. What we reported was that the people who had the greatest diversity in the oral microbiome had the best blood pressure. Those that had the worst blood pressure had the least diverse microbiome, and there were no nitrate-reducing bacteria that we could culture. So this was a nice association, but it's not causation. Next, we went back and we only enrolled young, healthy people with a good diet, good blood pressure that were physically active. And the only thing we did was give them mouthwash twice a day for 7 days. And then we measured their blood pressure. We did oral tongue scrapings, cultured the bacteria to figure out what was going on. And we published this in 2019. 1 week of blood pressure, 1 week of mouthwash caused a 26 millimeter increase in blood pressure. And this was a 21-year-old dental student. In 7 days, we made him clinically hypertensive. And 4 days after we stopped the mouthwash, his blood pressure normalized. And we picked up the bacteria that disappeared when his blood pressure went up, and we picked up the bacteria that reappeared when his blood pressure normalized. We sequenced these bacteria. They were expressing these nitrate and nitrite reductase enzymes. And we could predict steady state blood pressure in all of these patients by the presence and number of these 4 bacteria. So this is a completely new paradigm in the management of high blood pressure. And it explains resistant hypertension. So if you have high blood pressure and you go to your doctor, he puts you on an ACE inhibitor, an ARB, or calcium channel antagonist, and yet the data tell us that 50% of these patients don't respond with better blood pressure. It's because it's a symptom of oral dysbiosis. Now we can interrogate our patients. Hey, are you taking mouthwash? Are you using fluoride in your toothpaste? Killing the good bacteria. Now, if you get off fluoride, get off mouthwash, you allow these bacteria to restore and blood pressure normalizes. I mean, this is a game changer in public health. In all major chronic disease, including dementia, Alzheimer's, cardiovascular disease, ED, 4 hallmarks: low blood flow, inflammation, oxidative stress, and immune dysfunction. And nitric oxide improves all 4, overcomes all the hallmarks of every single chronic disease. So now in the last 10 or 15 minutes, let me just show you how we do this. How do we restore, improve nitric oxide production? There are hundreds of products out there, dozens of companies, if not hundreds, that are trying to sell you nitric oxide-based products. But the science, 99% of these products don't work. Arginine and citrulline save your money. They don't do anything for nitric oxide. In fact, you can actually do more harm than good. And arginine should not be given to post-infarct patients or patients with peripheral artery disease. There's nitrate products out there, but you must consume sufficient nitrate. There's an inherent inefficiency in reduction. You must have the right oral microbiome. 200 million Americans use mouthwash, don't have the right oral microbiome. There's 200 million prescriptions written for antacids every year. So that obviously addresses number 3. And then you must have optimal salivary secretions. Patients with Sjogren's syndrome, parotidectomies, other issues don't have normal salivary flow. Here's the inflammatory response. Let me just show you this. This is, we could induce inflammation. This is a real-time intravital microscopy. So we can do this in COVID through upregulation and binding of the spike protein and causing adherence and immigration of white blood cells. But if we give nitric oxide and we induce this vascular inflammatory response, you can see here you completely inhibit the inflammation in the lining of the blood vessel. We've seen this in COVID, downregulating the ACE2 receptor, preventing spike protein from binding, preventing the inflammatory response to the spike protein. So our hallmark has been a little bit different than any other company out there. If your body can't make nitric oxide, then we have to deliver it for you. Similar, if you can't make testosterone, what do? You give testosterone. If you can't make estrogen, you give estrogen. You don't give precursors and substrates and hopes your body makes it. The reason you're deficient is because you've lost the ability to make it. But now we understood that we could restore the enzymology, restore the function of the enzyme, and now we know how to restore the microbiome to enhance both pathways. These are our products that we brought to market over the years. We've got orally disintegrating tablets. We've got a fermented beet powder. We've got a topical nitric oxide for skincare and beauty. But again, if your body can't make nitric oxide, these products do it for you, and we fix the reason your body can't make it. I'm going to take you very quickly through our published clinical trials. When you take the lozenge, 10 minutes after the lozenge is placed in your mouth, we see a 13% increase in blood vessel diameter. That's a 34% increase in blood flow. It opens up the microcirculation. This is a 49-year-old chronic smoker with Raynaud's syndrome. 10 minutes after the lozenge, open up the blood vessels, perfuse the digits. This, I'll show you, one of the greatest, most gratifying things I've done in my career was save these kids that are born with a very rare genetic disorder called arginosuccinic aciduria. So they don't have this enzyme called arginosuccinate lyase, or ASL. And clinically, they present with hyperammonemia because it's a urea cycle disorder. But they have systemic disease. These kids will have to get liver transplants at 7 or 8 years of age, or they'll die of liver failure. They have blood clotting disorders. They have resistant hypertension, kidney disease. So this couldn't be explained by their underlying condition. So these physicians came to me back in 2005, and we started modeling this disease. And we published this in Nature Medicine in 2011. But we discovered that this protein ASL that these patients lack is what tethers the nitric oxide synthase enzyme to the membrane. So in these patients, this protein complex falls apart, and they're completely compromised in their ability to produce nitric oxide. So now when we look at if these patients can't make nitric oxide, that explains the liver disease, explains the blood clotting disorders, explains the hypertension, explains their kidney disease. And then in 2010, we started monitoring a single patient. And you can see this is his lifelong blood pressure profile. At 5 years of age, he was diagnosed. For 10 years, had uncontrolled hypertension. And in February of 2010, he presented to Texas Children's Hospital. He's put in an intensive care unit. His blood pressure was 210 over 115. Nothing would lower his blood pressure. We knew it was a nitric oxide issue, so we started dosing him with isosorbide, which is an organic nitrate. 4 days later, he was released from the hospital, went home. A year later, he came back. Blood pressure was 200 over 110, taking 20 milligrams Isodil 4 times a day, and nothing would lower his blood pressure. We made a lozenge for this kid, the one that we currently sell. And within 4 hours, we completely normalized his blood pressure. We sent him home, followed him out for 21 months. We got him off all prescription medication and saved this kid's life when all other therapeutic options were unsuccessful at lowering his blood pressure. His kidney disease resolved within 5 days. We completely resolved his heart disease in 5 months. At 15 years old, he had a heart twice the size of a 15-year-old and poor function. 5 months after we started our lozenge, completely remodeled his heart, normal size, normal function. Now, what about, let me spend the last couple of minutes on aging, really anti-aging and skincare, because obviously we want to live longer, live better, and we want to look younger, right? And the skin is a reflection of really internal health. So we had a topical nitric oxide that you apply to the skin. It diffuses into the dermis, dilates blood vessels, recruits capillaries. We've got 5 published clinical trials. I'll go very quickly through this. This is using the serum twice a day for 30 days, once in the morning, once in the evening. You see the age spots disappear, the inflammation on the chin is resolved, the inflammation, the wrinkles, tone, texture, and clarity of the neck improve, broken blood vessels, varicosity, wound care. We're taking this through FDA now. This lady had a facelift, developed a full thickness ulcer, applied the serum 2 to 3 times a day. 10 days later, complete closure, very little scar formation. Polycystic acne, this lady suffered for 2 years, unresolved. 30 days, completely resolved the polycystic acne. We have a 15-year-old teenage acne scar that within 30 days completely remodeled the skin, mobilized stem cells, and almost completely reversed 15-year-old scars. So to wrap this up, people always ask me, well, how do I improve my own nitric oxide production? And you only have to do 2 things. Stop doing the things that disrupt it and start doing the things that promote it. If you're using mouthwash, you have to stop. Get rid of fluoride in your toothpaste. Fluoride's a neurotoxin. It kills your thyroid function, and it's an antiseptic. If you're on antacids, you must get off antacids. Your body cannot and will not heal. It cannot produce nitric oxide without stomach acid. And then balanced diet in moderation. Throw in some more green leafy vegetables, moderate physical exercise. I'm a big fan of infrared light therapy, or just 20, 30 minutes of sunlight a day, hyperbaric oxygen. And when all else fails, we have products that do it for you. So I'll just conclude that nitric oxide controls and regulates vascular structure and function. There's an age-related decline that asserts its effect on cardiovascular risk. Restoring nitric oxide can lead to better vascular function, longer telomeres, more mitochondria, and better stem cell function. Your body cannot and will not heal, and nitric oxide is foundational for longevity. So let me just leave you with words of caution. Trust the science and those that actually do the science. Don't be fooled by creative marketing and deceptive advertising. Putting ingredients in a bag or capsule does not make it a nitric oxide product. The greatest enemy of knowledge is not ignorance. It's the illusion of knowledge. Ignorance is curable. That's why we're all here, to learn how to apply these fundamental truths into our daily lives. But there's companies out there that have an illusion of knowledge, that are trying to sell you nitric oxide through gummies or chews, and it cannot happen. The science doesn't support it. So with that, I thank you very much. Again, congratulate all for being there and starting out the new year, next week, really focused on not only improving our own lives, but improving the lives of our loved ones and our family. And thank you, Jim, for all you do and for allowing me to be a small part of your overall mission. And so if you got any questions, if we don't get them answered today, you can follow me on social media. There's my email. There's my educational website. And so with that, I'll open it up for questions.
Wow, wow. Wow, great presentation. Really.
Thank you.
Really to the point. One of the best I've heard. I mean, is the best I've heard of nitric oxide for sure. And
Thank you.
so my first question is, where and how can we get these products you have?
Well, our product website is n101.com. That's the letter N, the number one, the letter O, number one.com.
Okay, fantastic. Hope somebody's writing that down. Is it on your?
Tell everybody this presentation is going to be posted.
Yeah, we post these presentations on our website. So
Yeah, I'm happy. If you got it recorded, I'm happy. You can certainly share this with share it with the world.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, I think we have some questions in the room, so we'll go around. Yeah.
Thank you very much. How do we measure nitric oxide in the body? And other than blood pressure, what biomarkers are there to tell us how we're doing in terms of increasing our nitric oxide?
Yeah, very good question. It's been a challenge for the past 20 years. About 15 years ago, I developed a salivary test strip. We can apply your saliva to the end of a test strip and it turns bright pink, and it's kind of a biomarker for nitric oxide availability. It was the first point of care non-invasive diagnostic for nitric oxide. And I tell people it's a good tool to have in your toolbox, but it shouldn't be the only tool you're using. Because what we're finding is there are a number of false positives. And we saw this in the 50-year-old hypertensive diabetic patient with ED, and his saliva test was normal. Obviously, he's not replete in nitric oxide, but what we found was he had an active oral infection. So there are no false negatives, and I think the test strips probably have some utility there, but I don't use them clinically anymore because of the false positives. So what we have to do is look at functional measurements of nitric oxide. And there's there's a technique called venous occlusion plethysmography. There's some clinicians that have these FDA-cleared medical devices that can look at vascular structure and function and the blood vessel's ability to make nitric oxide. But unfortunately, there's not a lot of clinics that have that. So we rely on symptoms. And so, if you have high blood pressure, obviously that's a symptom of nitric oxide deficiency. You take our products or do things that restore, you can see a normalization of blood pressure, then you're moving in the right direction. Same thing with exercise performance or erectile dysfunction. We can move the needle on these objective measures. But the biomarkers that kind of correlate, that are not measuring nitric oxide, but correlate with nitric oxide. In fact, many of my patents are on methods of reducing this. So one is C-reactive protein. If you're inflamed, that's typically a sign of nitric oxide deficiency. We give nitric oxide, we lower C-reactive proteins. I have the patents on that. The other is triglycerides. We see about a 15 to 20% reduction in triglycerides after 30 days. And really, no, we don't affect total cholesterol, LDL, HDL, which those are useless in terms of prognostic indicators of cardiovascular disease. We do affect certain lipoprotein particles, the number of oxidized lipoprotein particles. So those are kind of biomarkers that you can keep an eye on. If you're moving the needle on those, then you're certainly headed in the right direction.
I have a question. Can you take too much nitric oxide? And is there such a thing as too young for nitric oxide?
No, so the first answer is yes. You can drink too much water, right, and cause death and cause hypotonic lysis of cells, and it happens. So dose dictates the poison. So there's two signs of toxicity of nitric oxide. One is low blood pressure or hypotension, and two is a condition called methemoglobinemia, where we'll oxidize the heme of hemoglobin and reduce the oxygen carrying capacity of your blood cells. So you'll see an unsafe drop in blood pressure usually long before you see any methemoglobin formation. And that's why, we deliver a certain amount of nitric oxide over a certain period of time. And when you take our products as indicated, there's really no risk in overdoing it. But, if you take, if you want to put 8 or 10 lozenges in your mouth at the same time, I'm not going to promise you're not going to get lightheaded and see a drop in blood pressure. So, and then our fermented beet powder is so potent, we had to put it in individual sachets. So if you take it as instructed and indicated, then we deliver the right amount of nitric oxide over a certain period of time, and there's no issue.
Okay.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And I wanted to find out, I've heard different reports. When's the best time to take it? Is it good to take it before you go to bed, or what do you suggest?
Well, everybody's different. If you're at risk for heart attack or stroke, most heart attacks occur between 10 a.m. Before 10 a.m. in the mornings. So if you're at risk, if you've got overt cardiovascular disease, high blood pressure, then we recommend taking it first thing in the morning. Personally, I take one in the morning, then one in the evening, about 6 or 7. A lot of people take it right before bed and report better sleep. There's no stimulants in any of the products that we deliver, so I don't think there's an issue with it keeping you awake. We just believe the science that better blood flow leads to better function, and that leads to better sleep patterns, better performance. But usually what we're finding in our clinical trials is one lozenge twice a day, 12 hours apart, is usually does the trick, generally speaking.
Thank you so much. When I've heard you at Red Fest, I was very affected with the mouthwash. So
Yeah.
I quit it completely. But I'm glad I can ask you now, is it any mouthwash or only ones with fluorides, or is there any good mouthwash?
Well, really, we don't know. I mean, I'm not going to lie to you. The short answer is we don't know. But here's what we do know. We know that any mouthwash labeled as antiseptic, whether it's chemical antiseptic, whether it's alcohol, or whether it's fluorinated, if it says it kills 99.99% of the bacteria in your mouth, believe them. And that's not a good thing, right? But you see the commercials all day, every day. We're doing some studies now to figure out, okay, what about things like oil pulling? What about essential oils? What about baking soda, hydrogen peroxide rinses, things like that? And so we just don't have the data to date. But what I will tell you is I'm working on a nitric oxide friendly mouth rinse now because, as you know, probably a lot of people in the room want to have, nice breath and not knock over their neighbor when they're having a conversation. So we're trying to figure this out on how do we specifically eradicate the opportunistic pathogenic bacteria while maintaining a healthy, diverse ecology of the non-commensal or the non-pathogenic commensal bacteria. And I think we've cracked the code on that. And so I'm hoping in the next 3 to 4 months, we'll have a product on the market that if you want to use a mouth rinse, personally, I don't use a mouth rinse. I just brush my teeth twice a day. And I don't have any issues with halitosis or periodontal disease. So I think that's sufficient. But obviously, there's people out there who want to use a mouthwash. And I think if we can actually improve the diversity and the ecology of the microbiome, then it's not only going to freshen your breath, but it's actually going to provide health benefits. And that's unlike any mouth rinse that's on the market today.
Now, what about water floss?
Water floss, look, it's very important. You have to be able to, get the debris, the food debris out from between your teeth and gum line so that these bacteria don't respire on it. So I'm a big fan of water picks. I'm from Texas, so we use toothpicks, but water picks I think are probably more effective. And I think if you can put a little bit of hydrogen peroxide in there, it seems to have a good effect. But, I wouldn't do that every day because hydrogen peroxide kills all cells, bacterial cells and human cells. So you shouldn't use that every day. But on occasions, I think just straight water in a water pick and the occasional, dash of hydrogen peroxide may be useful.
Thank you. So interesting, and I really enjoyed your presentation. So could you take two questions? One is the difference between the lozenge and then the no beats products, and what you recommend there, and then also is it something that you could take for a while and then stop for a while, as it says that it does enhance your ability to produce nitric oxide? Thank you.
So yeah, I'll take the first question first. So the lozenges are really the supreme way to deliver nitric oxide. So let me just remind you, nitric oxide's a gas, right? It's gone in less than a second. So the challenge in therapeutics for the past 30 years is how do you deliver a bioactive gas in a solid dose form? And I'm the first and only person who's ever made a solid dose form of a bioactive gas. So we release a certain amount of nitric oxide over a certain period of time. So the lozenge is going to be your premier kind of way to restore nitric oxide production. So that's your daily, similar to your daily vitamin C, vitamin D, that's your daily nitric oxide support. The fermented beet powder we produce because, there's a lot of companies out there selling you beet products that don't do anything but turn your pee and your poop red from the beet, but don't provide any nitric oxide benefit. So we thought we can do better, right? We can remove the oxalates, we can ferment these beets to where when you put it in solution, it generates nitric oxide. And we position that product to be a pre-workout for exercise performance, or to replace things like 5 Hour Energy, Monster energy drinks, Red Bull, these stimulant-ridden, dangerous energy drinks that too many people are drinking. So personally, I use the lozenge in the morning. I usually work out in the afternoons. I'll take the beet powder right before I go to the gym or work out. But it's strictly up to you. One lozenge twice a day is typically sufficient for nitric oxide restoration. And then the second question, remind me again.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I already have healthy low blood pressure.
Yeah.
So that's part of my concern. But if you could stop taking it after a while, like how long would
Oh,
you
yeah,
take?
yeah. So theoretically, yes, because when you take this, it recouples the NOS enzyme, improves the diversity of the microbiome. But if we lived in a perfect world, we wouldn't have to do anything, right? But because we're exposed to environmental toxicants, we're exposed to EMF, certain frequencies that completely disrupt nitric oxide production, and we just live in a toxic world, I think we need that daily nitric oxide support. So here's what I've heard for the past 20 years. People take our product, and when I take my product, I don't necessarily feel any different. But then people go, well, I took it and I didn't feel any different. Then they stop taking it and they go, oh, well, you know what? I feel different now that I stopped taking it. And then they notice that when they take it, they feel, so it's subtle and everybody's different. So I think personally what I do, and because I think the science supports this, is we have to be proactive and take it prophylactically to prevent the loss of nitric oxide production from this very toxic world we live in.
Nathan, thank you. I want to let you know that your speaking makes an impact. A few months ago, maybe 6-7 months ago, I saw an online video of you via Dr. Joy Kong. You talked about mouthwash, and so I stopped it at that time. Sometimes you learn things along the way, and it's because of you I stopped that. I want to let you know that from your presentation today, I'm making 3 changes. The first is when you were here a few weeks ago, I asked you about the 2 lozenges a day because I take 1 in the morning, and it's hard for me to take the second one because on the bottle it says empty stomach, and so you told me take it anyway, or take it a little earlier, and I haven't done that because I'm very habitual, and so I haven't done that, but I'm going to do it now. The second thing is green leafy vegetables. I stopped green smoothies. I've been doing it for years, but I started wearing this glucose monitor, and it spiked my blood because of banana. So I stopped, but I'm going to start doing it again. If anybody has any suggestions about how to make the green smoothie taste good without the banana, please let me know. And the third thing I'm going to change is Raquel has an infrared sauna. I never use it. But you just said it raises nitric oxide. So thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you. It's good seeing you. Yeah, I remember our conversation. And here's what I do. I start every morning in infrared sauna, because I think that's what we're trying to recapitulate nature, right? So if I can't get outside and get direct sunlight, I usually wake up in the morning, I'll take a lozenge, and then I go sit in my infrared sauna for, at 160 degrees for 25 to 30 minutes. So that's releasing nitric oxide. It's getting me the full spectrum infrared. I sweat, I detoxify, and it just allows me for my 25, 30 minutes of prayer and meditation, and really a chance to be grateful and show gratitude. And that's how I start my day every day, and I would highly recommend that.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah.
Okay. We have time for one more question. Deb?
Oh, yes. Thank you very much for your presentation, and thank you very much for your product. I'm actually one who takes it. I rushed to you at RadFest.
Yeah, I see lots of friends in the audience. Good to see you.
Yeah. About 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with type 2 hypertension, and so I got on medication. And then recently, well, since RadFest, I've been taking the nitric oxide twice a day. And I also lost 15 pounds recently. So, and I monitor my blood pressure regularly. With the medication originally, I was still a type 1 hypertensive. But then when just recently I've been with my blood pressure, I'm like totally normalized, actually to a point of where I'm considering I might need to lower the medication. So
Objective.
I feel, I mean, I think it's a combination of both. I think the weight loss played a role, but I also think that the nitric oxide played a role as well. And I'm really pleased with that. So my question is going to be, so you answered my arginine question, you answered the synthase question. My question is, what kind of an impact do antioxidants have? What role do they play? Is it a synergistic role with the nitric oxide, like vitamin A, D, E, C? And is there a regimen or a too much or too little in relationship to taking the nitric oxide? Because I'm going to continue to take the nitric oxide.
Well, so we look at kind of everything's in a silo, very focused, and what we focus on is what does it take for the body to make nitric oxide? So that lozenge provides the redox potential to specifically prevent BH4 tetrahydrobiopterin oxidation. But we can't forget, that everything is connected, right? And there are biochemical systems that feed into nitric oxide production. So I'm a big fan of antioxidants. Every day I take, 2,000, 3,000 milligrams of vitamin C. I take fish oils, fat-soluble antioxidants, because we need to prevent lipid oxidation. We need to prevent oxidation of biomolecules. And the antioxidants basically provide the electrons to prevent the oxidation of other biomolecules. So it's a balance, right, of oxidative stress versus antioxidant activity. They're chemical antioxidants, and they're enzymatic antioxidant systems like glutathione peroxidase, thioredoxin. And so we have to feed those. And then there's these redox couplers that vitamin C prevents glutathione oxidation. And so we have to feed this. So I'm a big fan of high antioxidant foods, high antioxidant supplements. And I think we have to do our own individual testing because everybody's different, right? It's very hard, if not difficult or impossible to ascribe a one size fits all. What works for me may not work for you or anybody else. So you have to custom tailor this, but antioxidant foods and supplements are extremely important.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Bryan. You want to say something else, Jim?
Oh, yeah. Well, that was a fantastic presentation and really valuable questions and answers here. So thanks again for being on with us. Happiest of holidays with you. I invited you to our New Year's party. I know you're already tied up, but next year. Okay, so have a beautiful rest of the year, and thanks again. Beautiful.
Okay, thank you guys. Keep up the good work, and I look forward to being with you.